Ghosts are so ingrained in our culture, you might be in the minority if you don't believe in their existence. Today, it's all first-person ghost sightings. Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the Scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
Okay, I have seen things that I perceived to be ghosts. And you say you have never seen anything that you perceive to be a ghost.
Perceive is the operant word. I mean, perhaps I saw something and it just didn't occur to me. If there was a ghost and I saw a ghost, but I just didn't think, oh, that's a ghost, then I wouldn't have remembered. And so I couldn't right now recall I saw a ghost or potentially saw a ghost.
Okay. These people believe they saw a ghost. This first one did not want to say who they were. So we're not saying who they are. Quote, I saw a ghost once. I really did. I'm a scientifically inclined person and it really bothers me on a daily basis. I was 13 years old, fully lucid. It was dusk. I was in my room, normal day, no stress or abnormalities. I lay on my bed and an opaque woman with a white hue, dressed in a robe, appeared out of nowhere from my right. She walked across the room and out my bedroom door on the left, clear as day. I've seen nothing else since. I don't know what to do with this information, but it's real. And because I know it's real, I know there are bigger things, potentially post-death, that we don't know about. And every day it blows my mind. Okay, so what do you think that was? 13-year-old kid, not bedtime. 13-year-old kids stay up late. So it's not bedtime. It's only dusk. He's just laying there, probably chilling.
He's laying, though.
He is in his room. He is laying on his bed, yes.
So unfortunately, you can't rule out in that case that he just fell asleep briefly.
Okay, so let's just rule that out. Can we just rule that out?
No, if we assume that he wasn't asleep, then, that's truly indicative of something out of the ordinary. Actually out of the ordinary. So if he's of sound mind, he's not schizophrenic. Right. It wasn't asleep.
And presumably he is of sound mind, or at least this has never happened before or since, because he hasn't said, this happens all the time. He said, I saw a ghost once.
You should always say for non-exotic things, those have the higher likelihood. So like possible explanations that are 100% possible are more likely, just inherently, or you should consider them more likely. So for example, somebody broke into his house and was dressed that way.
A lady?
That is more... Well, okay, I'll put it like this. In the exotic category of explanations is also that it was an alien from a different dimension. We don't know aliens from a different dimension coming into our dimension and walking around as ladies are possible. We also don't know ghosts are possible.
Why can't we say that it was a spirit of a human being exists in another dimension?
So here's my problem with that. What even is a spirit? We have a cultural idea of a spirit based on stories, just like this one. There's not like a very definitive concept of a spirit.
That is true.
In the exact same way, there's no definitive concept of like an alien from another dimension.
That is true.
We also have cultural conception of aliens from different dimensions, but
we also have cultural different ideas of what another dimension would consist of.
Yeah. So, but we don't, picture a different dimension. What you're picturing is what you've learned from popular culture, from stories, from it's different than like something normal, like a rock. You don't have to be told what a rock is. You don't have to hear stories of rocks, and that's how you know what a rock is. You've seen them.
Well,
you've seen them, you've picked them up, you've probably licked them.
At some point, someone did say, this is a rock, don't put it in your mouth.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah, so at some point, somebody associated a word with it.
Yes.
You have experience associated with it. You've probably kicked them.
But it's concrete. You can hold it. You can see it. You can feel it.
You know what happens when you interact with them. That's not the case with quote-unquote spirits, ghosts, apparitions. Essentially, all of your experience, even if you've had a sighting yourself, is from secondhand accounts. So stories. That's really not very healthy for your own model of this phenomenon. If it was like you're a ghost hunter and, you're like an underdog ghost hunter and you've like battled ghosts, you've seen millions of ghosts, you've captured ghosts in your ghost capturing machine, that's a different story.
That is true.
But so like in this case, you can't actually rule out any of the other exotic explanations. And so it's a generally better idea to rank possible but potentially improbable normal situations that that you do have first-hand experience with, and rank those as higher likelihood. Again, ghost versus alien from a different dimension, those are basically the same probability.
Yeah.
Somebody breaking in your house, that's higher likelihood. You falling asleep is way higher likelihood. Chances are you've had a dream, you've fallen asleep and imagined something is in the area, which wasn't actually in the area.
As someone who has had a what do you call it?
Sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis. No, not sleep paralysis. Night terror. It feels very, very real. Yeah. So that is possible. Okay, here's the next one. You're going to love this one because it uses your favorite word that you hate when people use it. I
already know what you're going to talk.
This is by Pibbles and Paint. Quote, I saw my father's energy the night he died. A warm light came into the room, stopped in front of me, then faded away. The reason I know I wasn't dreaming was because my dog woke me up. She lifted her head and looked directly at his energy. She didn't bark, which I would like to think means she felt the energy was familiar. The energy seemed to come up to make sure to say goodbye, which my father couldn't do in his last weeks of life. He died of pancreatic cancer. I'm a science-minded person as well. Ghosts, in the way humans portray them, seem incredibly unlikely. But energy, that I can understand. That can be proven, felt, and seen. End quote. Okay, so why can't we use the word energy for what this person is describing?
Well, so we know what energy is. So,
what is energy?
So, for instance, you take a rock, you bring the rock up, you do work on the rock. You're adding potential energy to the rock. You let it go. As it speeds up, it's building energy. So it's building the capacity to do work on other things. That means essentially transfer its energy into those things.
Okay.
Energy it's just like an abstract concept related to how objects can make other objects move. You can go a little bit deeper into the like complex physics of there's different types. There's different types of physics that maybe are a little they don't relate to motion, but regardless, it's essentially, for almost all intents and purposes, energy is the ability to move other things.
Okay, so I don't understand why that is in opposition to people using the word energy to describe a residual something from someone who's died.
So imagine if it was a hallucination or a dream or whatever. That vision in your head does not have energy like you're talking about. But you could describe it as an energetic thing. What people are referring to when they're saying energy is this popular conception of something that's energy-like. And energy-like is something that's made of energy. And something's made of energy if it's energy-like.
Like light or electricity or...
Yeah. So it's like not a tangible object that appears to have a form. It's like if I'm shooting rays of energy out of my hands, maybe the energy passes through stuff. It's more of an aesthetic than a very rigidly defined concept. Now, we also have the word intangible. Mm-hmm. We have ethereal. We have incorporeal, those are all essentially equivalent to what people are saying when they're saying energy. Again, energy, like from a physics standpoint, is like from a rigidly defined standpoint. It has a definition, like you can measure energy. You can't.
Right. So this person felt something. They saw a light. Their dog reacted to the experience, and they had an emotional response to this situation, and their perception of how they described it was using the word energy.
Yeah, so beyond the word energy, whatever. It's completely valid communication to use the word energy.
I think most people would totally understand what they were talking about.
It's totally valid communication.
Okay, this next one is from Trudy, or Trudy. And Trudy says, there are lots of I's in her name. And Trudy says, quote, just before they switched off my little brother's life support, I saw a white camera flash on my landing at home. So like the top of the stairs probably. Or midpoint on stairs. It's the only place in the house with no windows or electronics that could explain it. Like the original poster, I've never felt anything before or since, and I've lived in this house for 20 years. I tend to be quite skeptical, but I do often think about that one. Unexplained event. End quote. Okay, camera flash is something that, she's describing it as camera flash. Flashes of light, moving orbs are something that people commonly report after somebody, or at the moment of somebody's death. Now we can prove quite often when someone takes a photograph and there's orbs or there's a flash that it's an artifact of the camera making process.
Yeah.
But when you see it with your own eyes.
So one thing to consider, again, from the perspective of like regular explanations first, which people typically always do. If you're in an emotionally compromised state, you might perceive things differently, just normal. You know, you might see something that you normally see and interpret as something else.
So I would like to say something. When you're under stress, as someone who gets visual auras with migraine, I know when you're under stress, you see things, and you see things unusually, and you're more likely to be able to see those things under certain light conditions. And what she is describing is a place with no windows or electronics. So it's probably darker than the rest of the area. There's no reflections, there's no beams of light coming across or anything, no light flashing. So it's entirely possible that this was a visual disturbance related to stress.
Yeah, totally. And also, I have something to say about this. So when I'm coming back from a walk, there's a blue, like spray painted dot on the road, and it's a weird thing. If I see it in the corner in my peripheral vision, my brain says, "Oh, it's a light stain."
Oh, yeah.
So, like, if you've looked at something bright, you'll have a light stain in that spot in your vision for a while. If I look at the dot directly, I perceive it as a spray painted dot on the road. But if I see it in my corner of my eye, my brain automatically says, "Look, a light stain." If I look at it, then it's spray paint. If I look,
it's kind of like that thing about the dress, where some people looked at it and they thought it was one color,
and you can have two people having already been looking at it for a while, talking about it, looking at it, and disagreeing.
Yeah.
And people who can switch between them consciously, it's like 100%. It's black and blue or whatever, or gold and white. 100%. There's no like in between. Their brain is fully committed to whichever.
All right. This next one is by Milo Roast. I'm assuming that's a guy. Quote, "This is kind of nuts. I actually don't believe in ghosts and only saw this because it appeared on my feed, even though I'm not on this subject. The same thing happened to me and I brushed it off as just seeing things. But then my roommate came out of his room and said he saw it too." And I think what they're referring to is that the original poster was the person who said when they were 13 years old, they were laying in bed and saw a lady. Okay, so his roommate came out of the room and saw it too. "We both saw a lady in a white robe or dress. I saw her walk through the hallway into his room, and he saw her walk through his door and into a mirror on his wall. To this day, I still feel very odd when recalling this and even tear up every time for some inexplicable reason. Even while writing this, I still can't explain it.
So wait, it was that they were both like up, moving around, and then one of them
and
saw
one
this.
saw it in one room, and then it walked into another room, and the other person was in the other room, and they saw it come into that room and then walk into a mirror and disappear.
So like that kind of thing is much more interesting to me, because presuming they're not lying, that person's not lying or making it up. If they both had the same experience, they were both right there, they both witnessed it, they're both standing. Oh, and presuming this isn't also a dream that converted into a false memory or something, then that's real good, a really good anecdote for they're actually having something for the phenomena, you know?
Okay, so I've been listening to a podcast called Hysterical, and I think it's only got 3 episodes out so far. There'll probably be more by the time this episode of our podcast comes out. And it is basically about it started with a girl posting on some social media platform. I think it was before TikTok, so maybe it was YouTube. And she had, and it's audio, so I'm not seeing it, but she clearly had a tic, like Tourette syndrome. And
verbal?
It was a sound, and it sounded like she was blowing air out of her nose. And the person who was narrating described her as also, she's doing something with her arms. And she's saying this just started one day and she doesn't know what it is. Does anybody know what this is? Nobody in her family or her life knows what it is. And then a whole bunch of people who watched it start saying they're having it too. And it's mainly teenagers, and they're mainly at one school. And until it's numerous almost always girls. And they all have it to the point where it's debilitating. And then an adult woman gets it. And that's where, as far as I've gotten. But mass hysteria, and I'm assuming this is where they're going with it, is a real phenomenon where one person says they see something, and then this goes into the subconscious of another person, and then they imagine they're actually also seeing the same thing. So I'm not saying that's what happened to Milo Roast, but it is possible that Milo Roast saw something out of the corner of his eye, and his brain filled in the parts of it that he didn't actually see, and made it be a person in a dress walking through his room. And he calls out, and his friend is in the other room, or his roommate's in the other room. And, maybe maybe it's a car going down the street and it's a flash of light going through their windows, and kind of, how that will travel. And he says, did you see that? Oh my God, I just saw a lady ghost walk through my room. And then it changes what he saw to believe that. So there are some explanations there.
Definitely. And those sort of explanations are always, with any anecdote like this, any story, they're always possible. I mean, even the sleep thing, like it could have entirely been a dream, and your brain remembers it as a actual event. The best sort of like evidence, even at a personal level, for stuff like this is you experienced it, and you spent a good amount of time, probably, hopefully repeatedly, having experienced this, and you could do various things with it. I mean, essentially experimenting with it.
Yeah.
If you just witness something, there's nothing to it. It's like if you see a UFO and it blasts through the sky. You didn't gain anything from that, really. Yeah.
Okay, this next one is really interesting because it shows a difference in culture. This guy is from England. His name is ex-Brit Canadian. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's a woman. I don't know. I always say he, but they. Ex-Brit Canadian. Quote, I grew up in the UK believing in ghosts. Moved to Canada where pretty much everyone I know just says bullshit. However, in the UK, I knew 4 different families who were 100% reliable, decent, normal, down-to-earth folks that didn't do drugs or have mental illness in the family. They each had different stories of their hauntings. One had an old stables he was converting, and every evening at a certain time, a little girl would skip through the house, hoop trundling. I think hoop trundling is where they used to take a stick. It was like in the 1800s or maybe even earlier than that. They'd take a stick and they'd make a hoop roll.
Oh, okay. Like hula hooping, but with a stick.
But not around their body. Hula hooping
around the stick.
They just roll it. Yeah. It would stop where a wall used to be. You could hear her footsteps. Another had a shop located in a very old 1700s building. They had a lady that would appear in certain upstairs rooms occasionally. It was a family business with 3 generations in the company, and they had all seen it at one time or another, as had some of their staff. Sometimes a customer would come across it, and it would scare the pants off them. I could go on so many stories. My father used to do a lot of work in stately homes in the UK, some of them very historic. He could tell a lot of stories too, end quote. Okay, that's interesting because it's a different culture. So what this person is basically saying is it's really accepted to see things. And so people who had no shame in relating things they saw. But I will say one of the times I saw something, and I won't even go so far as to say it was a ghost, but I had gotten up in the middle of the night. It was before you were born. I think it was before you were born. We lived on Avenue I in Boulder City, and I got up to go to the bathroom. I didn't have my glasses on because why put your glasses on in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom? And I walked into the hallway, and a small child, 4 or 5 years old, who I perceived to be Carrie, my middle child, who at that time was 4 or 5 years old, came up to me wearing a long nightgown and said, "Mama, Mama, Mama." And I said, "Oh, for God's sake, can't I even pee in peace?" And I went into the bathroom, shut the door, and as I'm sitting on the toilet, I thought, I don't think that was Carrie. And so I got up and walked out and looked, and Carrie was asleep in her bed, perfectly asleep. And so that was weird. And I thought at the time, I wonder if that was like a ghost or something, because I was fully awake. I was not dreaming. I wasn't asleep. It was definitely not Carrie. Also, when I looked at Carrie in her bed, she was not wearing a long nightgown. So fast forward to my sister was babysitting Christina and Carrie one night. Your dad and I were out, and my sister was laying on the floor watching TV, and she heard something, thinking it was Carrie. She looked up and she saw a little person, presumably Carrie, walking across the doorway to the hallway. So from the living room, you could see this doorway that went into the hallway. And she's walking across the hallway, so across in front of that door, saying, "Mama, Mama, Mama," going towards my bedroom. And so my sister got up thinking, oh, well, she's had a bad dream or something. She's looking for her mom. And she went in there and there was nobody in the bedroom. So she went back and checked on Carrie, and Carrie was sound asleep and was not wearing the long nightgown that my sister saw. And so that was different. That was unusual. That wasn't mass hysteria, because I assure you that when I had that experience, I don't think I even mentioned it to my sister. It was just like But my sister told me about it, and I probably had told your dad about it. You know, I probably, at the time that it first occurred, my experience, and then when my sister told me, I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. So
I do have something to say along those lines, which is if somebody has an experience, they can't convey what they felt. They can't convey what they really saw. They can't, not perfectly. Right. They could maybe get somewhat close, sort of, but not really. And so a lot of information that validates their experience is lost. And that's always, always true. If you have an experience, that may be good enough evidence for you. It may confirm it for you, that whatever thing. Like let's say you go and you are taking a walk and an alien spacecraft comes and beams you up and you talk to the aliens, whatever, you're completely sure it happened. And it really did happen. You still can't go to somebody and say, yeah, this happened.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they'll believe you.
Yeah.
But on an individual level, it may be perfectly valid evidence for that person.
Right. Okay, so this is our last one. It's by Cranky Frankly. Quote, "When I was about 12, I was in my yard about 10 feet from our screen door. I was in a vile mood because I was using the hose to clean out our disgusting cat box. I saw movement by the screen and looked up to see a man in a white t-shirt, black-rimmed glasses, and greasy blonde hair looking at me through the screen. So they're outside, spraying out the cat box, look up, and inside the house, behind the screen door, they see this person in a white t-shirt, black rimmed glasses, greasy blonde hair, looking at them from the screen, through the screen. I thought it was my brother, so I stood up to say something when the man turned and went back into the house. Maybe it was a porch like ours, you know, screen.
Oh, yeah.
Screen, and then, so, because aren't they in the house if they're inside the screen door?
Yeah, probably. I mean, a lot of people don't consider screened in porch, you know.
So I went inside and asked my mom what my brother was doing home at that hour, and she said, he's still at work, no one home but us chickens. It shook me up a little bit, and I made a calm walk through the house and found nothing amiss. So I have seen figures, most notably, which I've talked about on here before, is seeing the previous inhabitant of this house standing in the kitchen. A man I never saw, but when I described what I saw,
it was consistent.
It was consistent with what he actually looked like. So I know that, and I can't think what it's called. There's a name for the phenomenon where you look at something and your brain fills it in and sees a pattern in it. And
I think it's pareidolia.
Yes, pareidolia. Okay, so like if you looked at the screen and there were shadows in it, your brain may think it's...
Yeah, I had that the other day where it was like, it looked like a cat or whatever for like a second or two. And then it was like, oh, no, wait, that's not a cat, because it was just the general shape of a cat.
Right.
And if it's close enough, your brain will say it's this, and then it sticks to that until it gains
more information.
Yeah. But, you know, like if an experience lasts a while, your brain gains enough information, it can rule all sorts of stuff out. Yeah. So if, you know, the guy sees the person, he walks up and he's looking at the person, he opens the door, there's the person, and then they walk away. Like that's enough 100% to invalidate that it was anything other than what they experienced.
I don't want to invalidate any of these people's experiences. Although I'm coming up with different reasons and you're coming up with different explanations of what took place.
Yeah.
I don't want to invalidate it because it was their experience, and if that's what they believe happened, I'm going to trust them on that. I'm just looking for ways to look at it differently than just saying blanket, it was ghosts.
Yeah.
Maybe it was not ghosts.
So if you assume all these stories are true, not true, they're true, presuming they're not lying. They're true experiences. But presuming they really experienced the obvious, like, conclusion of what they experienced, then what are those things? You know, presumably they're all the same sort of thing. There's the ones involving people. There's a thing that is shaped. It looks exactly like a person, right? And maybe it can walk into a solid object and disappear, like a mirror. It can just appear somewhere. They don't typically talk about like hearing noise. So presuming they're mostly quiet or entirely quiet, it doesn't guarantee that it's like the remnant of a dead person or whatever. You know, we say spirits, but you know, maybe it's just a natural phenomenon. There's like particles that shape themselves like people and do this. There's no reason particularly to believe one exotic explanation versus others.
Well, it is interesting that all of these that talked about seeing a human form, the human form was moving. It was not like just a static image. Like quite often in movies, it's depicted as just you'll see a ghostly apparition at the top of a staircase and then it kind of dissolves.
See, the problem with that, like in a movie, you can't just have the apparition stand in one spot nice like that. I mean, in real life, if you saw that, you would walk up to it or you would do something.
Right.
But it never happens like that because otherwise the person would walk up to it and they'd be able to like experiment. They'd put things through it and then they'd get data. You know, they'd collect some ectoplasm. But that's not how it ever happens. Or else everyone else would have the data.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but again, like, okay, what's the phenomenon? If you go by the observations, you say the observations are valid observations, then you don't even really know that much. But the phenomenon is like, okay, typically shaped like a person, maybe shaped like something else, like a ball, like a point of light, like something like that. Typically, presumably slow moving, and smoothly moving. So not something that's like jerkily, crawling across the floor or something. like you see it and it just like dissipates away. Maybe not fades away, but it goes somewhere. Like it goes around a corner. You walk, it's gone. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of have to question, why would those features be in that particular phenomenon? Why would that be in those particular objects? Having a sighting of a ghost or an apparition doesn't guarantee that isn't an exotic thing you're seeing. Some atypical thing, like an actual real ghost or a real apparition, but communicating it to other people, they won't believe you as much as you can believe yourself. They're really lucky they don't see something completely horrifying.
Like what?
Well, if this phenomenon is indeterminate, it could be, you could see some kind of horrific skeletal demon.
That is true. If not crazy people are seeing things and they look like ghosts or dead loved ones, why aren't they also seeing dragons or bloodthirsty monsters?
It could be really horrible.
So it's because those things, there really are ghosts, Joey. There really are ghosts.
It could be more like those are more typical things you see. And so those typical, like for instance, a dead person, that's not unusual. There are people who lived here that are now dead. And so if it's an actual spirit of the person, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But if it's something more exotic, like a demon from another dimension, it could be wild. It could be like just seeing it traumatizes you.
I created a subreddit, and I'm going to have the link to it in the show notes or the description below, whichever platform you're on. Truly Terrified is a Salt of the Earth production. Tell us your story and send us your comments. You can send us a 3-minute voicemail at 715-575-9420 or text us at that same number. You can also email us at lynnandjoeonthego@gmail.com. And our contact information is also in the show notes with handy little links. So please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run from the ghost.